Welcome to the Skeleton Key. I'm Niko, and I have been looking forward to giving this a video of its own. I want to talk about breathing because I often talk about, from the first video, I talked about the breathing that happens between all the different positions in the skeleton key. And I glossed over it really quickly, but this was actually one of the first things that I looked into, and as you can see by those graphs, very professional looking. I know I actually made those graphs back then because apparently that's how my mind works. And yeah, I was just experimenting with actually doing the different breathings and reflecting on my own yoga practice as well, and stuff that I've done meditating in the past. What it feels like to just play with your breath and do different things. And yeah, yeah, breath play. Oh God. Yep. Right. So the point is that the hubris and the nevma are sort of, nevma referring to lungs again. The whole breathing action is encapsulated in those two sections. So beginning with the hubris, entering the nevma, and returning back to the hubris. And the speed with which that happens can actually impart qualities to the way that the hubris and nevma are expressed, as well as how quickly they express themselves. So, for example, say, and look, I'll return to this, I think, in a video, but say it's about childhood and growing up. In the hubris, imagine it's, being a kid. It's like the child. And in the nevma, it's adulthood. It's being an adult. And to very quickly sort of feel that one has to be an adult is like a very quick inhalation, which is about urgency. And that might happen if there's like a family crisis, or in some way your world is like turned upside down. That's an urgent entrance into adulthood that really can affect the kid, right? Hubris into the nevma, child becoming an adult urgently. Whereas to very quickly for an adult feel like a child again is energizing. A quick exhale, it brings energy. And we can see how that's actually kind of nice. Or the completely opposite, if I was to very slowly as a child begin to feel like an adult and slowly feel myself to be mature, that gives a sense of repletion. And by repletion, I mean, when you take a really big breath in and that just fills you right up, in the sense of like not filling your tank, but like that's really increased the amount of oxygen in your blood and sort of will allow you to exert yourself or breathe less further down the line because you're repleted. Right. So in this sense, to have a sort of not necessarily an extended childhood, but to have a very gradual transition into adulthood is repleting. And in returning to childhood, to do that very slowly and to sort of unwind into returning to that child state is calming. It's hard to say exactly what that would look like, but maybe that's the equivalent sort of unwinding of the slow building up in terms of maybe loosening the grip that work and other responsibilities have on the life, and returning to a play state and doing that slowly as opposed to quickly. Not that one is better than the other. And talking generally once more, the nemesis and daimon can only be accessed by holding the breath, either in or out. In that sense, the hubris and the nevma can be said to be breathing, and the nemesis and the daimon can be said to be a sort of asphyxiation. If breath can be thought of as, if breath is about sustaining life and continuing the reactions that keep the body alive, and the hubris can be said to represent the ego or the hero, and the daimon, the very depths of the repressed unconscious and the demon function, sort of a counterpart to the ego in many ways. It's not so much that going between the nemesis and the daimon is an asphyxiation so much as it is breathing, but for your shadow, which is like an abyss for your energy to flow into, which will eventually, not at all to say that you can't put energy into your shadow. In fact, you must, But this isn't giving energy in the sense of bringing to consciousness. This is giving energy in the sense of allowing more and more of the self to become unconscious, expanding the domain of the unconscious as opposed to expanding the domain of the conscious. So there's this sort of tug of war happening here between expanding consciousness and lowering it, between the conscious and the unconscious, between growth and decay, or breathing and asphyxiation. That could be a skeleton key unto itself. Really, anything, any binary can become a skeleton key. I'd like to see that proven wrong. Any concept that naturally has itself and its counterpart and its complement, I think could go into the skeleton key. If you've got one that's burning in your mind and you just want to see it put into action, and you're not sure exactly how, or you just want to see me make a video out of it, easily done. My pleasure. But I digress, right? So the nemesis and the daemon. Say, to return to our child example, if I have a prolonged childhood, or I think of myself as a child for an extended period of time, that's the equivalent of like holding the breath. And to hold myself in that child state for a little bit of time creates an inwardness where that's actually quite powerful for reflection, self-development, to return to that inner child, we would call it. But the diamond slot isn't the child, it's the shadow of the child. So you could say it's more like being childish, which has a lot of connotation in English. And to remain childish for even longer, it can be quite euphoric, to be petulant and demanding and take no responsibility. Children are very egocentric, and it's quite a wonderful experience to be given license to do that growing up. And to be humored and tolerated. So for an adult to experience that, well, they can. I'm sure we've all met very childish adults, but for them it can be, especially if they've been there for a long time, quite a euphoric experience. And that's euphoria in the sense of when you're holding your breath out, and the sort of wave of pleasure that can come is also a signal that you're really running low on oxygen and you really need to breathe, and like the body's actually like in a crisis, right? So it's sort of, the euphoria is like the last stopover before passing out or dying. So it seems like a good thing, but it's actually a warning, right? Which is more obvious for the nemesis in the nausea that comes from holding in the breath for too long. So if you take a really big breath in, not liable if something happens to you, just don't be an idiot. If you take a really big breath in, and that's obviously quite expansive, you're literally stretching the lungs, the diaphragm, the rib cage, and it can feel very nice. But to hold that breath in for too long creates a real nauseating feeling, and eventually that breath just needs to come out. When I tried it, I remember I was just starting to feel sick, and it was very different to what it felt like to hold the breath out. And this, in terms of our child example, in the nebma we would have an adult, and to feel that one is an adult for too long and to hold oneself in that state can be expansive in the sense of taking on those responsibilities, discovering the sense of self, finding one's independence, and it's very much a lot of growth can happen there, expansion. But to stay in there is nauseating. To feel like, this is my life now, huh? This is terrible. I feel sick. Give me a break. Give me a rest from this. And that's where the exhale back into the child state would come. To somehow return to the inner child from the nausea of a really prolonged need to be an adult. But that nemesis slot I wrote as being corrupted. We often think of children as being innocent and adults as being corrupted. It's not that simple, but I think it's illustrative that perhaps it's the shadow of the adult, or the nemesis to the nevma, that would be corrupted, in the same sense that the daimon is childish, where the hubris is just a child. So in both these cases, the corrupted adult needs to somehow connect to the inner child. And if they do that, they can do that in these 4 ways. To return to our case of the child that had to grow up really quickly, for that urgency, that quick in-breath to become an adult, and they held that breath in because then they became an adult and they started to get on in the years, but they never returned to that inner child. So they're holding it in, they're expanding, and now they're feeling nauseous. a lot faster than their peers would have because they got to the Nedma urgently, right? And for them, the two options are to have a return to the inner child, an energetic or calm one, depending on how quick it is, or to begin the asphyxiation process by becoming childish as a sort of compensation for how corrupted and overly adult they are. This person that had to grow up so quickly, it's almost as if their lost childhood starts coming out again in these really negative and shadow-like ways. So they're either a corrupted adult or childish. Seems pretty bad, right? Until, of course, maybe this person, this corrupted adult, is acting childish, and then they think, okay, what if I inhale again and return to the Nedma? What if I actually, either with urgency or hoping to replete myself, what if I return to adulthood, real adulthood, not the sense of being corrupted, but adulthood in the sense of responsibility, accountability? What if I looked at the ways that I've been acting and was really honest with myself and took actions to fix that? What if I really acted like an adult? That's the way out from that childish slot, is to actually be an adult. And from there, just keep breathing with the real inner child. Hubris, Nedma, back and forth, however you like. It doesn't have to be urgent and energizing all the time. And likewise, it doesn't have to be calm and repleting all the time. It can be fast and dynamic, or it can be slow, and that's breath work. In our day-to-day life, we tend to take very shallow breaths. We breathe in a shallow way, not really filling the majority of our lungs, not stretching at all, and most of all, just not conscious of it, not allowing our body to flow with the breath and be aided by it. Oftentimes, along with like holding other muscles and like clenching our jaw and our shoulders, which, by the way, clenching the shoulders would also restrict the lungs to open themselves. But likewise, sometimes we go through moments where we're actually just holding our breath unconsciously, especially when something's difficult or complicated. And not breathing just makes everything harder. If we can be conscious of our breathing, everything becomes easier. And that applies to real life as much as it applies to this skeleton key, which, whilst being once removed from our day-to-day reality, follows a lot of the same rules, in the sense that if we can be conscious of how we're breathing and decide, okay, I've realized I'm in the daemon slot, I'm going to inhale into the Nedma, and I'm going to do that urgently. I want that to be quick, but after that I want to calm down again, so I'm going to slowly return to the hubris. And if we can consciously interact with these combos, it's literally, they're combinations. I could be like, all right, I'm going to do 1C, I'm going to do 3B, or whatever. Once upon a time, I actually did this. Yeah. I did 1BC when I was just curious, like, okay, that looks like it would be a lot of fun. After I tried it, this is what I wrote. What a trip. So 1BC is about calmness, urgency, euphoria, and expansivity, right? So we can literally like tailor the experience we want out of life, out of interacting with these concepts, first through deciding to breathe consciously. Some would say the ideal breath is just a nice, calm, deep breath. That's if you want to relax. There are ways to apply breathing that can be very energizing. You're not necessarily going to breathe that way when you're going for a run or when you want to perform athletically, though it might also be good to calm you down. And to return to the little example that I did of the short inhale, long hold, long exhale, long hold. From our example, that would be a quick entrance into adulthood, but not holding that very long, and a very slow return to childhood, which is held for a long time. I don't know if I need to apply that to the example, but the point is, once we realize how the skeleton key works, and once we realize the role that breath plays in modulating our flows between these categories, in actually creating the subjective experience of moving between these categories, we can decide how we want to move through these categories and when we want to. And if that can be a conscious decision, we're no longer at the mercy of the asphyxiation cycle, which in hindsight, it's very obvious to know that you've been in it. But at the time, might not be so obvious unless we really look at it and see it plotted out like this. But anyway, one more thing. And this is uncharted territory. I haven't really fully integrated this into the concept yet, but I've been very curious and would like to know your thoughts, if you have any, on what the role of laughter would be in a breathing schema like this, or crying, because these are real, almost like hyperventilating experiences. But in the case of laughter, and even sometimes crying, can be very pleasurable. I wonder if that's what role that can play in a successful navigation of the skeleton key. I'm sure that's something that we'll return to, and maybe I'll need to experiment on. But for now, thank you so much for listening. I hope you got anything out of it. Either way, I enjoyed it. I love this shit. But yeah, take care. Ciao.